Ephesians 2:8 states, "By grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God." But how do we know whether someone is truly saved? We might consider one's adherence to biblical doctrine or the spiritual fruit of one's sanctification. Or perhaps it's as simple as the question of how we voted on specific American foreign aid programs. That's the controversial question on the docket for this episode of the Theology and Ethics podcast of the Kirkwood Center. The Kirkwood Center is where we bring the best of Christian scholarship to the church to help equip the saints to engage with the culture. My name is Davis Green. I am the head producer for the Kirkwood Center. And with me, of course, is the president of the Kirkwood Center, Anthony Costello. Anthony, why don't we start out with a bit of your background for those who aren't familiar?
Yeah, thank you, Davis. And it's good to see you on the other side of the podcast again this time. Yeah, so my name's Anthony Costello, and I'm the putative president of the Kirkwood Center for Theology and Ethics, which we're going into our third year now. And we started this a couple years ago with some colleagues and friends from Talbot School of Theology, where I did 2 master's degrees after a career in the military. Became a Christian about 14 years ago, an evangelical Christian, grew up Roman Catholic. So I have a lot of interest in Roman Catholic theology as well. But became an evangelical as an adult when I got saved while in the military. And then after that came out here to California to go to Biola University Talbot School of Theology, got into apologetics first, and then did an academic degree in theology, and have been writing and researching ever since these last almost 10 years now. So yeah, that's basically it, or enough for now.
Yeah. Enough experience to analyze some theological leaps on the internet, at least.
Right.
Well, as I said before, kind of exploring one of those particular theological leaps being made, at least as it pertains to the connection between politics and theology. Though for context, this whole conversation is kind of built around an article that you wrote a couple months ago titled, "Is USAID Necessary for Salvation?" We'll link to that in the show notes. But I want to start with a quote, or at least just one kind of brief intro from your article, where you just noted that recently there has been another wave of what I can only call irrational thinking about politics by, in my view, otherwise very good evangelical theologians. So just as a broader question, and kind of background for you writing that article, what is it that's going on out there that you think is important to address?
Yeah, well, and the title of the article is obviously like, I would say sarcastic, but it's obviously like the answer's obviously no, right? Is USAID necessary for salvation? It implies that somebody has written something that could only be called irrational because nobody honestly believes that. But I think this is couched in the context of our political environment. And this has been said many times before by many people since Donald Trump got elected for his first term in 2016. It's not that the political environment wasn't already bad before that, but it seemed to have gotten exponentially more irrational since Trump's coming into office, where obviously there's been a split over Trump within the evangelical church, a pretty substantive one, and where we've seen obviously some factions of the church maybe treat Trump almost as like a messianic figure, and then others demonize him to the point of where it's obviously the whole shtick about Trump being the next great authoritarian since Hitler or something. And so there's a rationality on both sides, and when it sort of seeps into theological issues, people who are otherwise have written very good, have done very good theological work in the past, I feel now have started to sort of go a bridge too far in making claims about political issues as they relate to, in this case, soteriology, where you have a very good theologian, very respected, not a liberal theologian by any means, Roger Olson, who wrote an article suggesting that one's political orientation towards a government program, USAID, maybe call into question whether or not they're true Christians or not.
Yeah, I can read specifically what he said too, if we want to jump into that. And I'll say too, this was particularly from another Patheos article, which we'll also link to for those who want to read.
Yeah. So Roger Olson,
full context of his comments.
Roger Olson and I both write for Patheos. He's been writing for Patheos, I think, much longer than I have. I've been writing for the last 4 years. So this was an exchange, although he never responded to my response. But this was my response to an article that he had written.
Okay. Yeah. So just in short, the kind of crux of it, or at least as it pertains to our discussion, was Olson saying, quote, "I believe that if a person claims to be a Christ follower but supports the shutdown of USAID, he or she needs to examine himself or herself and needs to be challenged by fellow Christians. I question the authenticity of such a person's Christian identity." I mean, before we kind of jump into that, any other context for Olson specifically?
Yeah, and I mean, I know, I think I know that Olson has certainly been very critical of Trump and those that, I mean, in his view, maybe seem to blindly be following Trump or what's called, obviously, the MAGA movement. So this isn't new in this for him over the last few years to sort of challenge conservatives who agree with certain policy issues coming out of the Trump administration, to sort of challenge them, as Christians. But when I read that statement, I was like, what are we really claiming here? Are we really going to go so far as to tell people or call into question whether the genuineness or the authenticity of someone's salvation which is the way I read this, because of the way they are oriented towards a political policy. Now we'll comment at that later, because there may be some political policies that, if you supported them or were against them, might seem to be a good gauge for whether or not your Christianity is authentic or not. But I didn't think this warranted that. Yeah.
No, and you kind of kick off the article talking about, I think you do a really fair job of breaking down just at face value what the implication of the statement is. You touched on it already briefly, but just, it seems reasonable to draw the connection between just the phrase like authenticity of Christian identity.
Yeah.
Extrapolating that out to mean salvation, and your conclusion there being, well, it seems irrational to conclude that, but then we're not sure how else to take that.
I mean, he gives this hypothetical, right? If a person claims to be a Christ follower, right, and supports the shutdown of USAID, it would be different. And I point this out later in the article. If he said, I believe that if a person claims to be a Christ follower, but and doesn't think it's right to support programs that or doesn't think it's right to alleviate hunger or poverty in the world. Okay, but that's not what he said. He said, if you support the shutdown of a program that in some ways is designed to alleviate poverty and hunger, but as we know, is doing all kinds of other things as well, right? And that was just like, I mean, that's, for a theologian of his stature, who is a careful thinker in general, by and large, has written good books and knows how to do research. I mean, I don't think that's just a sloppy statement. So I don't know how to read that other than to think that he really believes. He says, I believe that. that he believes that if one is against this program, then they must, and I don't know how to interpret this second part of this statement, that they must then question the authenticity of their Christian identity. Now, without trying to think, is there some esoteric theological kind of claim embedded in this language that, I'm just not understanding? But I think the average reader is going to take that to mean what he's saying is, if you don't support this program, you're probably not a saved Christian. You're not a real Christian. But what is a real Christian other than a saved Christian? I mean, it could be that he doesn't have salvation in view, but he's got something like orthodoxy, I guess, in view.
Yeah. But to your point, even that would be
there.
Is extrapolating or is thinking too highly of USAID. So, that's sort of how we take it at face value. It's not a whole lot of complexity with how to receive that. I think the point you made in the article is clear enough. So let's talk about, because again, you get into this in your article, which I think is really helpful. Sort of the idea behind it of, determining whether another supposed believer is really authentic. Just the practice of doing that in general.
Yeah.
As an introduction to that idea, why don't you explain like what tribalism is and why that's relevant here?
Well, okay. I mean, maybe those are two different things. One is whether or not we can is more the question of whether or not we can know that someone else is saved. And I mean, the answer to that very straightforwardly is no. I mean, at the end of the day, we cannot know who is in the kingdom and who is out. We don't have that kind of knowledge. That knowledge is for God alone. Jesus makes that very clear. That's why I used the parable of the wheat and the weeds from Matthew, chapter
13, 24 through 30 for those who...
And there are other places we could go in Scripture where it's very clear that only God knows who's in and who's out in that sense. Now, that does relate to tribalism in that there are sides. Especially since Charlie Kirk's death, there's been a sort of a faction within the church trying to claim that there aren't sides to things. There are no real sides, everything, these are all just misunderstandings. But, if there's clearly sides, there's always sides, we're not pantheists. We're not saying that everything is just sort of two aspects of the same thing. And the Bible is not a pantheistic text, right? There are separations of things to include those that are saved, those that are not saved, those that are in the kingdom, those that are not in the kingdom. So there are sides. We don't know. We don't have knowledge of who's in the one side and who's in the other when it comes to the spiritual reality of salvation. We don't know that, and we will not know that until we are dead and in heaven or in the new creation with God. So what we need to be careful of, and where it was a little astounding to me that somebody as well read and as good a writer as Roger Olson is, that he would make a knowledge claim here. Because he's clearly he's implying there are sides, right? When he says that you have to question your Christian identity, because that would be one side. One side would be authentic Christian identity. Another side would be non-authentic or inauthentic Christian identity. So he certainly is not trying to cover up the fact that there are sides here, but he's claiming to have a sort of knowledge, and I'm seeing more and more of this, to have knowledge of who is in and or out of the kingdom, which is something that in general we cannot know. And then to say you think you could know based on a criteria as weak as what someone's orientation to USAID is really what I call the theological bridge too far.
Within kind of the Orthodox, Reformed church, it's easy to hear similar conversations about non-Christians to say, oh, these friends of ours are super involved in everybody has a story like this. super involved in the church, but also out of nowhere talk about affirming same-sex marriage or whatever, right? Like that would hit in the same way.
Yeah.
To your point, it's more a question of what the quality of the criteria is.
Yeah.
So you need something more substantive than a voting pattern. But even the stuff that is more substantive, like something along the lines of abortion, same-sex marriage, stuff that seems to have a much like larger impact on morality and the state of humanity or whatever. Even that stuff, certainly online, is almost impossible to suss out. You actually noted in the article, there's plenty of people that are just uninformed, and then some that could also just be, you specifically say their wills are not aligned with the Word of God. So
yeah,
there's
but
none of
our wills are perfectly aligned with the Word of God.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the thing is, like,
yeah.
One can say, if you consistently defend abortion, then your will is not aligned with not just special revelation, but general revelation of God's revelation and God's design and God's evaluation of human life, right? But even there, so I can call into question the orthodoxy, the moral wrongness, the moral rightness of the person. I can call into question a lot of things, but I still can't say whether or not that person is saved or not. No idea, right? That's outside of my epistemic range as a human being. Same thing with same-sex marriage. So those we can call into question, again, the orthodoxy, whether or not the person's beliefs are in line with the biblical teaching and the long history of the teaching of the church. But I still can't make a claim about whether or not those people are in or out of the kingdom in the salvific sense. I don't know. I'd still have to say, I don't know.
Right? No, and the irony with all of this being kind of the online political discourse is that the only way we really ever draw conclusions like that is through relationship, right? Like the healthy examples of church discipline usually come from lots of conversations, lots of prayer, lots of time in community, working that out and trying to suss out where somebody's actually at.
Yeah.
Because, you could see a Christian friend repost something that doesn't seem Christian, but what conclusion are you going to draw other than, like you said, it's unorthodox? And could be reasons why they're doing that. Now, to jump back to what we said at the beginning, let's say, for the sake of giving the benefit of the doubt, that the implication is not like definitively saved or not, but rather, let's just say that Olson is saying, I would question whether that person is biblically well-informed or is in a state of being aligned with the Word of God, right?
Yeah.
Even then, like we were saying, that seems like still too much of a leap. Again, given this specifically what's true about.
Yeah, and especially when he uses the term identity, which identity has become a kind of layman's term for, a truly like a saved, elect, true Christian. But okay, let's say that what he means is similar to what I would say with regards to somebody who consistently votes for abortion rights or who believes that same-sex marriage should be the law of the land, etc. Those two, or that believes that there are multiple genders and we should somehow enshrine that in law, that there are more than two genders or something. All of which would be political orientations, which I think we would say are on the other side of revelation knowledge, of special and general revelation, so that they're not aligned with the natural light of reason and special revelation of the Bible. Fine. Okay, so let's say that he's doing that's what Olson means. I would still question that, because I don't think it doesn't give the benefit of the doubt to people who wanted to see USAID cut, that what they want is to see USAID cut. Okay, that they don't give the benefit of doubt that what they're saying is it's not a good program for what it's designed to do. Okay. It's wasteful. It's inefficient. It's doing other things. And we know this. It was supporting other initiatives that themselves were not in line with this, with Christian teaching, right? So it's corrupt. It's not just inefficient or ineffective. It's corrupt. Okay. So you would at least want to give the benefit of the doubt and not start questioning the Republican or the conservative Christian who's against AID's identity. Because, I mean, again, if they were against helping the hungry and helping the poor, well, yes, then you could question their orthodoxy, their identity, their being well informed about what God says, and so on and so forth. But this was focused on one government program, which was a fairly new one that I had some experience with myself in Afghanistan. And although the representative that I worked with in Afghanistan, he was a Christian himself, and he wasn't doing bad work, but I do think it was inefficient work, what they were doing. But, so again, even if you say this is just about whether or not the Christian who wants to see USAID cut is being orthodox in their belief or in their moral, walking out their Christian life, right? And that's what he means by authentic identity. Still, I mean, it's still, I think, a bridge too far to suggest just wanting to see that program cut. Because he's making it almost equivalent, like, oh, if you want to see that program cut, it seems to be implying, you don't care about the poor. You don't care about the hungry.
Yeah.
Well, that's not, that doesn't follow. That just doesn't follow.
No, and your point in the article being, it's not whether aid is happening, it's how.
Yeah. It's
and
the means.
Again, giving a hypothetical benefit of the doubt, if it was this just gold standard of foreign aid program, there's still an argument to be made about sometimes things get voted out and things get changed. I mean, these are kind of clerical administrative decisions, not so even if it was like a definitively like stellar foreign aid program, it may just be that doesn't last forever because it's not how that works. There's a lot of things to consider.
I mean, look, a lot of these people, they do want to demonize Donald Trump as a person, which he's got a lot of flaws, and his administration, and just make it seem like they don't care about people. They don't care about the poor, the downtrodden, right? That's just sort of in the woodwork of our political dialogue. But even if Donald Trump was like that himself, which I don't think there's any evidence that he is, by the way, you got to take into account everybody in his administration then too. Marco Rubio, State Department, Secretary of State. Like, there's no evidence that Marco Rubio wants to see poor people in Africa die and starve to death and die of AIDS. I mean, come on. Like, this is just, again, it's irrational. It's not rational dialogue, and it's not rational way to do theology.
The conclusion of its importance is flawed. It's kind of a misprioritization of, I guess, the moral goods, the moral ideas that are behind programs like that. One thing you mentioned, though, in particular, was his use of some kind of high-level examples of potential negative effects of cutting the program. So I believe you quoted two different publications, and your note there was just that there was not an equally, good faith effort to analyze the, reports of the corruption,
of
or
the corruption and the
from
inefficiency. Cutting. Yeah, and that's where too I would expect more from somebody like Roger Olson, again, who's has had a very good career behind him as an academic. I mean, he says, he gives a couple stats from time.com and about where he shows, or the Lancet and Time, where they give estimates of if this aid is removed, expect to see these kinds of terrible results. Give 4.5 million babies and children and babies under the age of 5 will die. 14 million will die total by 2030. Now, okay, those are estimates. And then he goes on to say, and I've read all the claims of USAID's errors, but in the article, he doesn't cite any of those claims. So he cites the claims that are estimates, which are prognoses, right? Forward looking, by Time and Lancet. This is what's going to happen if this aid is cut. And he says, and then he gives quotes. He gives quotes from those journals. And then he says he's read all of these, everything, all the claims of USAID's errors, but he gives no citations or quotes from any of those sources. So I just question, why would you do that? Why would you give some direct quotes from the journals who are doing this is going to be horrible, but you give no direct quotes to the journals that are saying, look at all the inefficiency, ineffectiveness, and corruption of this program? I don't think that's good academic work.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, I'm realizing that it also is operating on the assumption that this is abandoning all interest in foreign aid.
Yeah.
That seems to be the implication,
yeah.
Which is not an American thing. That's kind of a bipartisan thing. I mean, we're very involved,
the
world over. So that's
Well, and even there, in principle, you do have this. This is J.D. Vance has now made this famous Thomas Aquinas' idea. Probably goes back to Augustine of Ordo Amoris. Resources are limited. The ideal is to provide aid to everybody, but that's an ideal. I mean, at some point, which people group are you more responsible for? And the idea that Trump has had and has been, proclaiming since he became a politician and the president now is America first. And it's not immoral to take care of those that are directly in your care more than those that are not or indirectly related to you. It's not immoral to do that.
That's the principle even at the core of the life of the church. I mean, the kind of the role of deacons and sort of these ideas of, the structure of the church in Acts and the way that we are kind of taught to care for those in our immediate vicinity within the community first. Now, again, I'm not saying that as an example of our political structure needs to look that way, but at least if you're talking to someone who claims to be a believer, like you said, these are not immoral ideas.
I mean, one can apply this to one's own life. I mean, we both have little children. If we were doing all this great ministry outside of our homes and our children were malnourished because we weren't providing for them, I mean, that doesn't make sense.
No, right? And that's a really good point. I'm familiar with examples of just beyond dedicated pastors and missionary parents whose children are essentially estranged from them.
Yeah. Or become atheists and stuff, right? Because there's a malnourishment. There's so much effort and attention put into those outside of one's central unit, the family, that those in that central unit. Now look, to be fair, the apostles do go out, and we never hear of Peter's wife except I think once in the whole gospel. So we don't know. There is, in a sense, but Paul also says remain single if you can, like me, so that you don't have to worry about your family, about a biological family too. So we understand there's a tension there, but by and large, I think we all tend to intuitively know that God wants us to take care of our immediates, those immediately dependent on us, and not forsake them under certain special circumstances. Sure, maybe. So apply that to national governance instead of local governance, family, community, etc. And it's like this idea that Trump has and has had from of taking care of America first. I mean, it's not like a wrong or aberrant idea or notion. It's just not. And foreign aid is still going to be done.
Yeah, of course.
It's
not, and I don't think it's meant to be absolute. Like I could see some of these ideas being almost seasonal in a way where his goal, again, giving it the most, all the ways that he communicates aside, if the goal of the program is to stabilize us internally.
It happens all the time in the life cycle of nations and cultures, that there are moments of contraction and focusing on, because the internal problems, the internal infrastructures, the internal the culture in itself has started to decay in such a way that you have to limit your outreach, right? I mean, that's not unusual, right? So, I mean, I'm no political historian, but I mean, I think that's a fairly obvious fact. If the families in our country aren't doing well, if our communities, our big cities are not doing well, that there's some kind of contraction and focus back on the inner life of the nation, and that's going to have some effects on what we can do with regards to helping or assisting other people in other places. So, but again, even there, it's like, this is just one program. And I thought, I mean, I think Olson was really making a mountain out of a molehill in this case.
Yeah, and I think you illustrated that well. You mentioned the kind of idea of world police, right? So if we think that any removal of aid is directly killing people,
yeah,
right,
which is incoherent.
Yes, you mentioned the law of double effect.
Yeah,
which I was going to.
But because the way the media wants to spin this, and I hope Roger Olson isn't doing this, is that the way the media does spin it would be Donald Trump or the Trump administration is killing people in removing aid. Okay, so it's not a removal of aid that kills the person, right? It's the conditions on the ground, the disease, the corruption in the local governments, the economic problems, and as we found it, as I put in that one report, the moral corruption. People kill people. These are many nations we help are just violent nations. There's tons of crime, right? There's tons of crime. So these are the proximate causes of the death, the malnutrition, the starvation, etc. You're trying to alleviate those with the aid, but you can't say a lack of something is what does the killing. That just makes no sense, right? A lack of aid kills nobody. What kills people are the things that aid is trying to relieve or abrogate, right? So, but it's painted as Trump or the conservative or the Trump administration is killing people if they remove this aid. And that's just false, right? That's just incoherent and false. But it sounds good. It's rhetorical. I don't think Donald Trump or the State Department intends for those people to die, right? So even if it was the case that removing the aid would indirectly result in more deaths, that doesn't mean that's what the intention of the removal of the aid is. It's an unintended effect, but you can't ascribe intentionality to the State Department or the Trump administration for cutting the aid.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost a pseudo sunk cost fallacy thing where as soon as you show up to help, like just like pulling out of Afghanistan, pulling out of really anywhere, there are always going to be
Did pulling out of Afghanistan
done
cause a bunch of people to get beheaded the next day, which they probably did. Probably some interpreters that I worked with, if they were still alive, they would have got killed pretty quickly. Did pulling out of Afghanistan, was that the cause of Afghani deaths? No, the Taliban was the cause. So you can't go down that route. And with regards to the world police, if you wanted to reverse it, then say like, well, okay, so what causes a lot of death in a lot of the countries that were receiving the greatest amount of aid is crime, right? And I posted a link to a ProPublica article. I mean, crime, sexual violence, tribal rivalries, gang activity. This is what's causing the majority of deaths in a lot of the countries that received USAID. Okay, so if you're going to say removing this is going to cause so and so many deaths, the inverse of that is the more aid we give, the less people will die. Well, then let's apply that to the moral problem, the problem of crime. Why are we not then tackling or sending policing forces to stop violent criminals from killing innocent villagers and citizens and city dwellers? Why not police the world? Because we probably could do it better than the local Congolese government, police station. Or my brother goes to Nigeria a lot. We could probably police up certain parts of Nigeria better than the local police could. So why not do that? Because that'll result in less deaths. So I would like to see Roger Olson write that article, because that would be consistent. Then you say like, okay, we got to send more financial aid, but we also got to send more boots on the ground to do policing work in these other countries, because what's causing the majority of deaths in a lot of these countries is crime.
Yeah.
Criminal activity.
Yeah. Well, and it gets at the heart of why foreign policy, why all of this stuff is complicated and difficult, right? Like you can't just throwing money at a problem doesn't necessarily fix it. People receiving aid or intervention don't necessarily benefit from it in the way that we hope. We kind of have a long history of very complex foreign policy. Now, there's some really like shining examples. I mean, just the biggest one probably being America's involvement in World War II. Just seeing this still kind of strong gratefulness toward the United States for its intervention in the generations of families who were directly oppressed by Nazi Germany.
Right.
Look, and that's huge, but it's not perfect, right?
Yeah, and I'm somebody who leans towards interventionism when there's great evil. I always feel like, if possible, intervene. Nigel Bigger, I mean, just this is a little off topic. Well, it's related, but there's a great book by Nigel Bigger. I don't know if he's at Oxford anymore. He may be retired now, but called "In Defense of War," where he gives a defense of the intervention in Iraq and also in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And I think he makes a very compelling case that even if the whole WMDs and everything was a total hoax and the Bush administration made it up like everybody thinks they did, that there still may have been justification for the Iraq War simply based on the brutality of that regime towards its own people. That you could call it a policing intervention, in that Saddam Hussein was so torturous of so many Iraqis that it wasn't immoral for Britain and the United States and the Allies to get involved to stop that evil from happening. Now, isolationists and stuff, they won't want to hear that because that doesn't have anything to do with us and blah, blah, blah. And we just talked about the Ordo Amoris, where you would want to take care of your own. But I would say there may be a place, you just mentioned World War II, where an intervention in something going on that is a great evil may compel you to neglect your own community for a time, or sacrifice the health and well-being of your own community for a time. I mean, that's what World War I and World War II were. America suffered and sacrificed, and its community sacrificed because there were greater evils that could not be ignored. Would Roger Olson be willing to write an article saying, if people who are not for policing up, sending soldiers and police over to foreign countries to interdict criminality, if they're not for that, they need to question the authenticity of their Christian identity?
Now you've talked about earlier on. You talked a little bit about what kind of ideology or motivation might be behind somebody talking like that, because it's like you said, it's not uncommon, right? This is not a new way of speaking. People like to be kind of absolutist about things, so that they can be inflammatory or whatever else, or maybe they really think that it is all that evil. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of dig into sort of those root causes, because again, it might be easy enough for him to say, well, I didn't mean it that way, so all the points you made about the implications for salvation and the quality of USAID as a program itself are irrelevant. But even just somebody saying that at all is worth talking about.
I'm sure Roger Olson, he's not going to respond to this. He's older, and I think he's winding down and his writing, he's not going to probably deign to address a no-name theologian like myself. But if he were, I'm sure he'd have some counter arguments to what I'm saying, or would say that I misunderstood. I've interpreted him too literally, or I misinterpreted the part about what identity means here, and what and so on and so forth. But there is again, just to go back to this larger context of people doing theology since Donald Trump came into office. It is just like unleashed a rash of irrationality, in the claims that people are willing to make as qua theologians. And it just, I'm going to speculate here. And again, I have close friends who know Roger Olson. So let me say, I am sure Roger Olson is a very good man. I've already said several times, he's a well-respected theologian. He's written good work. He's done good work in theology. We're just talking about a couple recently, some of the things I've seen him and a few others sort of be willing to do. Right. And the ones that I've noticed, and this is speculative, right? So I get called out on this, fine. The ones I've noticed who are going way too far in these claims that they're making tend to have, and this is in Olson's case, and this is also Randall Rouser, who we've talked about in previous videos, tend to come from very fundamentalist homes, right? They've had backgrounds in really strict fundamentalist homes and upbringings, right? And they sort of broke out of that at some point in their adult life. Some of them, like Olson, have stayed fairly conservative in their views. Others less so. But I've had run-ins with some of these Christian theologians, philosophers who came out of these fundamentalist backgrounds. And when Donald Trump came into office, especially, they just sort of lost it. And I don't know if it's just their fundamentalist background is just coming, and they've started to go after conservative Christians who are reasonable in their views, but who have supported Donald Trump or voted for the Republican Party the last couple cycles, and they've just started to like go overboard in their criticisms of those conservative Christians, right? And I don't know, it could be a knee-jerk thing. It could be something that's deeply ingrained in the psychology there. I don't know. Again, very speculative, but I see a pattern. I see a pattern.
Yeah. No, and I think you'd be hard to find somebody in the church who hasn't seen that. I mean, we've had plenty of conversations with other believers. People have been in the church for forever who are very rigidly attached to some very progressive ideas that who would despite being exposed to all of this like orthodoxy and good tradition and good theology, even going being educated on it at places like Biola, who after all of that could still be pretty easily categorized as progressive Christians, at least according to kind of the David Walcott understanding, to reference another one of our previous episodes, which I thought was really helpful. And
what and again, I don't know, this is, again, I'm just not necessarily towards, this comment is not necessarily aimed towards Roger Olson, but what people have to realize who maybe have grown up in fundamentalist homes, and as they've become adults, they've become more liberal and more critical of people they see as conservative Christians, politically conservative Christians. What they have to understand and take into account is that a lot of politically conservative Christians grew up in very liberal and leftist homes. They became conservative later in life. They weren't always just fundamentalist conservative Christians. They had their conversions as well.
When somebody seems more earnest and more willing to chastise Christianity as a whole, which oftentimes you could see a lot of hypocrisy in the church maybe, but as a whole is closer to biblical truth than somebody who is actively opposed to it. But somebody in that headspace often seems more willing to criticize internally than to apply that same level of energy outward. And in my mind, you could pretty much always make the case that that's ordered loves. It's like an ordered criticisms. Like there's one that's doing more damage than the other. So like you said, it probably speaks more to kind of like a presupposition that's fundamental to them. That's based on, they're trying to undo the way that their parents did it.
It's so the idea here is that when you see sort of irrational or very exaggerated claims here, is there an irrational source behind them? We all are going to be irrational at some point. And again, just to bring it back to the main point of the podcast here, to make, for either from the right or the left, claims about people's salvation, you just got to recognize that is not in your purview, right? You do not know, nor can you. That has been told to us by God himself, by Jesus himself. Now, that doesn't mean we can't inspect fruit, as is often said. I would think that if somebody consistently defends abortion, same-sex marriage, multiple genders, all the way up to the point that they die, but says they're Christian, I could make a probabilistic assessment that, well, it didn't look so Christian, but even there, it's just an assessment, right? I can't say one way or the other. So we got to be careful. We should be careful. At least we can examine. Obviously, we're going to examine and analyze beliefs and behaviors and see if we feel that matches up with Christian orthodoxy, whether or not it displays the kind of fruit we would think to see from somebody who is a genuinely saved Christian. We can do that, but we can never say definitively. And I think Roger just went too far.
That's just about it from us. If you have any thoughts or questions, let us know in the comments. Check out the show notes or the video description for those 2 articles if you'd like a deeper dive after listening to this episode. Anthony, thank you for taking the time to engage with this and help us all think through some important nuances of the interaction between theology and politics.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Theology and Ethics podcast of the Kirkwood Center. Please take a moment to leave a review on your podcast app of choice. If this episode made you think of someone you know, please share it with them. If you want to get in touch with the Kirkwood Center, you can call or text us at 909-493-7799 or send us an email at contact@kirkwoodcenter.org. You can also visit our website at kirkwoodcenter.org. If you want to join the Theology and Ethics conversation and see more content, you can find the Kirkwood Center on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube and Substack. Until next week, my name is Anthony Costello. Thank you for listening to the Kirkwood Center podcast, and we look forward to hearing from you. Until then, God bless.